So it's now my delight to welcome our next speaker for this session. And our next speaker has had a lifelong interest in the DPRK and Korean socialism. He is the deputy chair of the Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il Foundation, an international body based in the Korean capital of Pyongyang. And he is also the deputy director general of the European Regional Society for the Study of the Juche Idea. He has been visiting the DPRK regularly since 1983 and has just returned from the celebrations of the 80th anniversary of the Workers' Party of Korea. Please, let's give a warm welcome to Keith Bennett.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and thank you to all the comrades who've helped to organise this meeting and kindly invited me to speak. Fiona, I'm not quite sure how long I'm going to take, so give me a 2-minute warning, yeah, if necessary.
No problem.
Now, one of the pleasures and problems of addressing a meeting after you've had a few other good speakers is that they've already taken some of your best lines, and so you're going to have to put up with a little bit of repetition. I'm sorry about that. But I think Dermot has explained very vividly some of the current realities and situation in the DPRK and the scale of the magnificent celebrations this time, which we were both privileged to attend. And I agree that it's hard to describe in words the grand scale and the sheer perfection of the diverse events that took place there, the mass gymnastics and artistic performance, the military parade, the mass procession and torchlight gala that took place on successive nights in Pyongyang. Now, as you're all no doubt bored of hearing already, I've visited the DPRK many times, starting from 1983. As I recall, I went on 2 occasions before for major celebrations of the anniversary of the Workers' Party of Korea, the first one of which was the 45th anniversary of the WPK in 1990. And what I think is interesting is that each one of these celebrations has occurred in a particular national, regional and global context. Now, of course, in 1990, socialism had collapsed in most of the countries of Eastern Europe. It was very much on its last legs in the Soviet Union, and on that occasion, communist parties and other left-wing progressive parties from right throughout the world were invited to Pyongyang on that occasion. I recall that the late John Haylett, the editor of the Morning Star, represented the Communist Party of Britain on that occasion. I think it was one of the first times, if not the first, that the Party of Labour of Belgium were present in Pyongyang. But there was no official representation from what was the last days of the USSR or from Eastern Europe. But with the gathering of communist parties and other progressive parties there at that time, as with the adoption of the Pyongyang Declaration 2 years later in 1992 on the occasion of President Kim Il-sung's 80th birthday, this was a statement by the Workers' Party of Korea that whatever happened in the rest of the world and to the rest of the communist movement, it intended to stand firm. President Kim Il-sung actually was very fond of the song The Red Flag, so it was really a statement of the words of the red flag, that though cowards flinch and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here. The 70th anniversary, which we've heard Dermot also attended, was had the presence of the Vice President of Cuba. But this time, again, as people have said, the celebrations were I believe, on a higher standard in terms of their scale and perfection, and also there was a very significant progress, I think, in the breadth of international representation. And it was all the more impressive, as was mentioned about the military parade, that the weather basically throughout all the functions was unseasonally and unusually chilly and rainy. And of course, extreme weather events are a universal phenomenon these days. For example, not just in the military parade, but the mass artistic and gymnastic display, it carried on for hours, not just with military personnel, but for example, with a civilian orchestra in driving rain. And it gave a new meaning to the old English saying that the band played on. The day after the major celebrations were finished, Kim Jong-un attended another mass gymnastics display, which was put on in order to thank all the people who have participated in the celebrations. And he put it very well and very accurately, I think, when he said in his speech there that, talking about the events, he said the weather was unfavourable throughout the events, yet everybody performed their role both perfectly and creditably. All the events were impeccable as a whole and in minute detail. Now, one of the things that impressed me most in the military parade, and of course I could cite many things. One could talk about the absolute precision. One could talk about the advanced weaponry. For example, the new ICBMs that were on display, and all this new advanced weaponry that's been developed completely self-reliantly by a relatively small country under draconian and crippling sanctions. But what I found even more impressive, and you can see it if you look at the videos, which I'm sure are on YouTube and elsewhere, was the broad smiles on the face of the participants who were taking part in this very disciplined military parade, and yet were not solemn, but they were happy about it, and displaying the sheer pride that the servicemen and women displayed in taking part in their country. And this I felt was something quite unique. Now, as we saw in the film, and we heard from Comrade Kim, it was a celebration of 80 years, and it's certainly not possible to recap all of that right now. But it was also, and I would say even above all, it was a forward-looking celebration. It was looking towards and celebrating the next steps of the DPRK people in building a modern and prosperous socialist state. Of course, that 80 years is a very considerable accomplishment, making the Workers' Party of Korea the longest ruling socialist party, having lasted for longer than the Soviet Union existed, and of course predating the establishment of the People's Republic of China, and a party that has survived all the vicissitudes and changes of the international situation and has defied the critics and the cynics that have always been quick to predict its demise. People not just in the imperialist camp, but there's also no shortage of them, unfortunately, on the left here in Britain too. At the start of the celebrations, Kim Jong-un attended a function at the Party Founding Museum, which we saw on the film, and he put it as follows. He says, "Our party is proud that it laid the foundations of socialism on this land in the face of manifold challenges and trials, that it is striving hard to build a powerful country which no one would dare to provoke, and that it has defended the glory of socialism, which must never be buried in history, through an indomitable struggle over the past arduous 80 years. Now, as we've heard, it was a very much an international occasion too. Premier Li Chang was there from China, the number 2 person in the Communist Party of China. Dmitry Medvedev was there as chair of the United Russia Party. Of course, he's a former president of Russia. But there were also people from all walks of life from Russia and China there, large numbers of them. The other political parties represented in the Russian parliament were also there, and there were lots of manifestations of people-to-people friendship, particularly with cultural troops from around Russia, and also from including a very popular Siberian rock singer called Shaman, making his second visit in 2 months to Pyongyang, and the group from Shanghai presenting Chinese revolutionary opera. I met some of my old friends from Russia. I met young people from China. I met returned overseas Chinese people who had been born and brought up in the DPRK, had moved to China to live later on, and were coming back, very pleased to come back to their second homeland to celebrate. And I was also for some time with a delegation from the St. John's Ambulance Service in Hong Kong, who were very inspired and impressed by their visits to places like hospitals, nurseries, old people's homes, and so on. And of course it was not just Russia and China that were represented there, although that was very significant. As was mentioned, Thonglun Sisulith, the president of Laos and the general secretary of the Lao People's Revolutionary Party, was there, as was the general secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam, To Lam. So you saw there with the representation from China, Vietnam and Laos, the unity of the socialist countries in Asia. And I think a reminder that over the decades, whilst of course there have been challenges in the relationships, sometimes quite severe, nevertheless, if we look in the broad sweep of history, the main current has been that the peoples of the DPRK, China, Russia and of course the former USSR, Vietnam and Laos have fought shoulder to shoulder in their common struggles against imperialism. So the celebrations were in the tradition of the DPRK's long-standing anti-imperialist internationalism, and particularly its support for the struggles of peoples throughout Asia, Africa and Latin America. We saw the revival under the new circumstances and following the global health crisis, the revival and development of ties with the global south, with delegations from Iran, as we've heard, and also Equatorial Guinea. But especially significant, I think, were the range of delegations from progressive Latin America, because of the importance of what's happening in that part of the world today. And it's worth noting that the history of the DPRK's support for and solidarity with the Latin American Revolution is a long and honourable one going back to the 1960s, and I would say very much worthy of a seminar in its own right. So who was there from Latin America? There was the party and government delegation of the Sandinista National Liberation Front, the FSLN, and the Republic of Nicaragua, which was led by the Supreme Election Council of the country. The national leader of the Workers' Party of Mexico, which is a part of the current ruling progressive coalition in that country. The vice chairwoman of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, the PSUV, and the national vice chairperson of the Communist Party of Brazil, the PCdoB, and a member of the Sao Paulo State Committee of the Brazilian Workers' Party, PT, which of course is the party of President Lula. And it's also noteworthy that Nicaragua, Venezuela and Brazil have all opened their embassies in Pyongyang in recent times. Indeed, again, as has been said, Pyongyang was really buzzing with foreign visitors. And whilst the imperialists say that the DPRK is a closed and isolated country, this really reminds me of the old, perhaps apocryphal newspaper headline, "Fog in Channel, Continent Isolated." Because it is Britain and other imperialist countries, not the DPRK and other socialist countries, that are in the grip of a nasty wave of racism and xenophobia, as we've heard today, of vigilante thugs running riot and attacking and bullying and threatening the lives of people in the so-called asylum hotels. My experience in, as you've heard, over 50 visits to the DPRK over more than 4 decades, is that the people of the DPRK, from the most senior leaders of the party and state to drivers, waiters, shop assistants, bar staff, whoever, treat all foreigners who come with good intentions, and frankly some who do not as well, with extreme courtesy and kindness. I think this reflects the innate nature of working people and most human beings, especially when they are not ground down by the intolerable pressures of capitalist society and cynically manipulated by the mass media and demagogic bourgeois politicians. The DPRK, in contrast, is a state where the intrinsic decency, solidarity and kindness of working people is embodied and placed on a scientific level, namely that of anti-imperialist solidarity, peace and friendship, and proletarian internationalism. And Kim Jong-un referred to this in his speech in the national meeting. He said, "Our party has struggled under the uplifted banner of independence and socialism in any adversity. This has made an enormous historic contribution to implementing the common cause of humanity for justice and peace. Our party has cherished as part of its faith the validity of the socialist cause and the inevitability of its triumph, and perfectly proved the scientific accuracy of its ideals, both in theoretical and practical terms, thus offering a substantial contribution to building a powerful barrier against the Allied imperialist forces' schemes against socialism and achieving solidarity and unity among the world's progressive forces. Our party and government are still coping with our adversaries' ferocious political and military moves of pressure by pursuing hard-line policies, holding fast to firm principles and employing brave, unflinching countermeasures. This is powerfully propelling the growth of the progressive camp against war and hegemony, and the international prestige of our republic as a faithful member of the socialist forces and a bulwark for independence and justice is further increasing with each passing day. Moreover, at the military parade, he said, "I take this opportunity to affirm that our party and the government of the Republic, together with the powerful revolutionary armed forces, will in the future too fulfill their responsibilities in the joint struggle of the progressive mankind for opposing injustice and hegemony and defending justice and peace." Now, this, of course, has a history. The Korean pilots fought in the Vietnam War against US imperialism. Korean pilots participated in the 1973 War of the Arab peoples against Zionism. Korean military instructors were present during the national liberation struggles throughout Africa. But of course today it refers above all to the DPRK's intervention into the special military operation carried out by the Russian Federation. The DPRK is the only country in the world to extend combat solidarity of this kind to Russia against the Ukrainian neo-Nazi forces. And in the military parade, some of those who participated in the liberation of Kursk took part, flying the DPRK and Russian flags together. I was sitting very near some of my Russian friends at that time, and I could sense and feel the real gratitude that has brought the DPRK and Russian peoples, even though their friendship already has a long history, but has now brought them together in an unprecedented way. And this again has a long history. Back in the 1930s, Kim Il-sung and his guerrilla forces at that time put forward the slogan, "Let us defend the Soviet Union with arms," seeing it as an absolute duty to defend the world's first socialist country. Of course, Russia today is not the Soviet Union, but it remains, or has become again under President Putin, a bastion of independence, an ally of the socialist countries, and a key supporter of the global south, and very much a frontline state defending independence alongside the DPRK, China, Venezuela, Cuba, and others. Long ago, the DPRK put up the slogan, "All anti-imperialist independent forces unite." In a word, anything that strengthens the unity and solidarity of the forces standing against imperialism or facing its aggression should be supported, and anything that seeks to weaken or undermine it should be opposed. There are other things that are very important in the successive speeches that Kim Jong-un made over those days, and I really recommend that they be read in full. On the Friends of Socialist China website, our report obviously mainly concentrates on the China DPRK bilateral aspect, but we have some extensive quotes, and we have links to three of the speeches he made. And I believe that in many ways a proper reading of these speeches is the best possible answer to the hostile propaganda, the lies, and the frankly racist demonization that the DPRK, its leadership, and its people face. In his speech, one of the most important things he dwelled on was what type of party is the WPK, and the question of the relationship between the party and the people. In his speech at the Party Founding Museum, he said, "The socialism the generation opted for in the days of taking the first steps towards building our party in the liberated country was Korean-style socialism that conforms to our actual conditions, and the way of building it was from A to Z self-sustenance and self-determination, i.e. believing in the people and relying on their strength. The history of our revolution and socialist construction gives clear answers to the questions of how a party, the people, and socialism can be bound together with shared destiny, how the party can gain the dignity and fame as an ever-victorious guide, and how the ordinary and simple people can become a great people with a strong character and temperament." And I think that I found very striking the phrase about the ordinary and simple people. And one reason I found it so striking is it reminded me of a quote from Lenin in the early 1920s, which, with a very rough paraphrase, Lenin said that let the bourgeois media, let our capitalist opponents ridicule us and jeer us and throw it, and slander us. So let them pick on any mistake we make, but the real struggle of what's happening is the unsung miracles that largely go unnoticed by hundreds of millions of people who are engaged in the building of a new life. And in the same speech, Kim Jong-un frankly addressed the dangers facing a long-ruling party with the passage of time. He said that today we need the same spirit, courage and self-confidence as we had at the time when the party and a new country were built. Leading officials of the party and the state should keep the party's original ideals and spirit as their mental attributes, have a correct understanding of the requirements of the times and reality, and the essence and core of the party's policies, and firmly cherish the intrinsic nature of the communists who shoulder their responsibilities while directly connecting all issues to the future of the party and the state. Our party will accelerate the advance of the revolution, sweeping away all evil practices such as ignorance, incompetence, irresponsibility, self-protection, formalism and expediency, as well as arbitrariness and high-handedness and abuse of power, which are rejected by the people and cause damage to socialism. When we feel tired and when we need greater courage, we should take to heart the spirit and fighting will of the party founding generation, who held high the red flag only in their empty hands and cut their way through bloody battles to bring about a new world of communism, and should display high enthusiasm for the revolution. At the national meeting, he said, "The past 80 years were really complicated and arduous, yet worthwhile and glorious. Those years witnessed a hard-fought war for repulsing the armed invasion by the Allied imperialist forces and defending the land and the dignity of the country, processes for building a country and creating a life again from scratch, and social revolutions that were accompanied by an acute class struggle and elimination of factions in the party. Following the establishment of the socialist system in our country, we found ourselves standing at the forefront of the most acute confrontation between the progressive and the reactionary, and between socialism and imperialism. Given the geopolitical position of the country, our party had to adopt a more resolute approach towards performing its mission of defending socialism. It had to give a strong impetus to implementing the cause of building the party's self-reliant defence capabilities. And the vicious schemes for isolating and stifling the country economically persisted from one century into the next. It had to cope with these schemes proactively and aggressively while pushing forward with the gigantic projects for socialist construction. Particularly amidst the worldwide political upheaval in the 1990s, it had to defend our ideology and social system, and entering the new century, in order to cope with the growing nuclear war threats by the US imperialists, it had to lead the people to make a new leap forward in socialist construction while simultaneously carrying on economic construction and build-up of the nuclear forces. And very importantly, he added, always aware of and guarding against the possible budding of authoritarianism and a number of other problems which are likely to separate the party from the masses as its ruling years get longer and one generation is replaced by another. We have made sure that an absolute spirit of serving the people prevails across the party. This is an important factor in our party's winning the unchanging trust of the people and encouraging them to entrust by themselves their destiny to our socialist state as a whole."
2 minutes.
I need one. Towards the conclusion, he stated, "A party that is among the people, not standing above them, a party that shares with them aspirations and ambitions, wisdom and strength, and sweets and bitters, can never disintegrate and does not lose vigour and vitality forever. It always remains as iron truth that our party cannot exist apart from the people, and that the party is great as the people are great. I would like to offer thanks once again to our great people who have always injected strength and wisdom into our party and devoted pure mind and diligent efforts with belief in victory as well as the party, while pioneering the arduous and yet sacred socialist cause for as long as 80 years. When we strive for some more years in the same spirit as now, we can well change our life remarkably and get closer to the goals we aspire to. Availing myself of this opportunity, I will always cherish love for the people and not neglect my obligation of requital. I affirm my commitment to working harder to live up to their trust. And I can't think of a better way than this to conclude my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keith, for sharing those incredibly valuable insights into the 80th anniversary celebrations. I think it's so important for us to hear the words of respected comrade Kim Jong-un, the different sentiments and values that are being expressed about the future of the People's Korea. And it's really amazing to hear about the internationalism on display at the celebrations and the ongoing people-to-people relations that the DPRK is continuing to foster. So again, let's give a warm round of applause for Keith Bennett.